You're shopping for an OLED, and you've settled on the LG C4. It checks all the boxes. It's colorful, it's bright, it has 144 Hz support. And unlike competing Samsung models, it supports Dolby Vision and DTS audio formats. What's not to love? But then you glance over and notice the LG B4 for a cheaper price. Your mind immediately ponders, but surely I'd be losing out on a ton of performance, right? Well, perhaps not as much as you'd think. Hi, I'm Abby from RTINGS.com, and we're here to highlight just how surprisingly close these two TVs are. We'll be covering HDR brightness in and out of game mode, reflections, image processing, and gaming performance. We'd also like to thank our good friend Stop the FOMO, as he suggested this comparison. Alright, so when it comes to picture quality, is there a difference? Well, the LG C4 is definitely brighter in HDR content, both on our test slides and in real content. While neither TV hits 1000 nits, the C4 gets closer to being able to fully display content mastered at 1000 nits, as it hits up to 804 nits in our real scene test. And it gets as high as 950 nits in test slides. In comparison, the LG B4 maxes out at around 680 nits. Will you notice this? Well, if you're watching content mastered at 600 nits, you won't. But otherwise, you will indeed notice that the LG C4 has more of that pop to it. When it comes to game mode though, we're entering the twilight zone. We don't know what happened this year with the LG C4, but it's LG's only OLED TV to lose a ton of its brightness when in game mode. The G4 doesn't, and guess what? Neither does the B4. That's right, even though the C4 is noticeably brighter than the B4 in most content, it loses so much of its brightness in game mode that the B4 is now, at times, the brighter TV of the two. Yes, the C4 is still capable of hitting higher peaks, even in game mode, but the B4 is more consistent and performs particularly well in complex scenes with highlights and shadows. What about colors in HDR? Well, even though the C4's slightly higher HDR brightness does let it display slightly brighter colors than the B4, it's extremely close, and most people won't be able to see the difference. And for the color gamut, the B4 even manages to cover a tad more of the DCI-P3 and Rec 2020 color spaces. Yes, barely, and no one will notice this, but it's still an impressive showing by the B4. And when it comes to SDR brightness, these two TVs are basically identical. You wouldn't be able to tell the difference between them, as the B4 hits 398 nits in our SDR real scene test, while the C4 hits 411 nits. Yeah, that's close. Overall, when it comes to HDR and SDR brightness, the C4 can indeed get brighter than the B4 can. But in game mode and SDR content, the B4 is basically just as bright. This doesn't mean that the two TVs will look identical in bright rooms, as even though they're just as bright in SDR, the C4 does have slightly better reflection handling. But I mean, look at those scores, 9.1 versus 9.4. The main difference here is that the screen on the B4 reflects light back a bit more, plus glare is more diffused on the B4, making the reflections a bit bigger and hazier. The C4 uses LG's Alpha 9 AI processor, while the B4 uses the Alpha 8 processor. So surely the TV with the better processor will have the edge when it comes to, well, processing, right? Right. This is likely the biggest difference between the two TVs, as the C4 cleans up low bitrate content substantially more than the LG B4 does. But the B4 is still good here. You'll just notice more macro blocking in dark scenes than on the C4. However, that's the only area where the C4 has a noticeable edge over the B4 when it comes to processing, as they're about equally matched when it comes to upscaling performance and HDR native gradient handling. We'll say it right away. If you're a PC gamer with a powerful rig, you might want to consider the C4, as unlike the B4, it can do 4K at 144 Hz on all four of its HDMI ports, while the B4 is limited to 4K at 120 Hz on its 4 ports. But if you're not a PC gamer and prefer to game on a console, then you get absolutely no benefit whatsoever from 144 Hz. The B4 otherwise performs the same when it comes to input lag and response time, and also supports all VRR technologies. It also supports Dolby Vision gaming, just like the C4. Well then, I bet some of you are thinking, geez, why pay more? And for the most part, you're absolutely right. These two TVs are surprisingly similar, as the B4 matches or is extremely close to the C4 in almost every category. Yeah, the C4 does look a bit brighter in most HDR content, but it's not a night and day difference. and it certainly doesn't look much brighter in game mode. And when it comes to SDR content, they're basically identical, even if the C4 does have slightly better reflection handling. The C4 does have the edge for PC gamers due to its 144Hz support, but for anyone else, geez, the B4 gets awfully close to the C4. LG likely knows all of this, and this is why these two models are quite close in price. You're not saving a ton of money by downgrading to the B4, but at the time of filming this video, the price difference between the two is anywhere from $100 to $400 depending on the size. That's still a sizable chunk of change, but it's also not a massive difference. Now, we'd like to throw a third option into the ring, the Samsung S90D. Listen, we all love the LG C4 and B4, but it's hard to ignore the performance advantage of Samsung's competing OLED. The S90D is definitely brighter than the two LGs and is noticeably more colorful. It also comes with 144Hz support on all of its ports. The only thing you're missing out on with Samsung is Dolby Vision and DTS audio format support. That certainly matters for some, but most people won't care. They sure will notice the more vibrant panel on the Samsung OLED though. When comparing the B4 to the S90D, that extra $100 to $300 gets you a lot more performance than it does when upgrading from the B4 to the C4. But if you're dead set on a mid-tier LG OLED, you'll have to decide for yourself if you'd rather save a bit of money or push to get the slightly brighter TV of the two. Frankly, you can't lose either way, and it's nice to have that option. So happy shopping. Well, that's all we have to say about the LG C4 versus the LG B4. If you want a more detailed write-up on the TV, check out our written reviews. The links are in the description below. Until next time, I'm Abby from RTINGS.com, where we help you find the best product for your needs. Looking for headphones and can't seem to find a pair? We have just what you need. In-depth reviews packed full of all the data you can't get anywhere else. Head over to our new channel, RTINGS.com Audio, and make sure to hit that subscribe button. Ding ding!